The moment I saw the anniversary gift, I should have known something was wrong. It was too extravagant, too out of character for Josie. 30 years together, and she'd never been the kind to fuss over material things. But there was a Rolex. Not for her, but for me. I couldn't remember the last time she'd even glanced at my wrist, let alone cared enough to notice I'd been wearing the same cheap Timex for years. "I just wanted to spoil you," she'd said, her smile so warm it melted my skepticism. For a while, I believed her. We'd been through a lot. 3 decades of shared dreams, raising 2 kids, and weathering the storms life hurled our way. Maybe this was her way of saying thank you for it all. Or so I told myself. But something gnawed at me, a whisper in the dark corners of my mind. The whispers grew louder the night I found her on the back porch, cradling her phone like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her fingers danced over the screen. Her face lit up with a soft, secretive smile that wasn't meant for me. "Who are you texting?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. Her body stiffened. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered before it returned in full force. "Oh, just Sharon," she replied smoothly, naming our eldest daughter. "She's asking about the casserole recipe I made last week." Her voice was steady, but something about her posture screamed guilt. Josie was a terrible liar. Always had been. My gut told me she wasn't texting Sharon, but I didn't press. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we've been happy lately, hadn't we? Still, the whisper lingered. It was subtle at first. The lingering glances at her phone. The way she started locking it whenever she set it down. Then came the excuses. Late-night grocery runs for things we didn't need, book club meetings that seemed to run later than usual. And the biggest red flag? The way she suddenly started paying attention to me. Josie, who had always been more practical than romantic, was suddenly showering me with affection. Compliments, unexpected kisses, even, God help me, attempts to reignite a spark in the bedroom that had long since fizzled out. At first I was flattered. I wanted to believe she was rediscovering the man she fell in love with. But it felt forced like a poorly rehearsed play. By the time I found the dinner receipt tucked in her purse, a fancy steakhouse on a night she was supposedly out with friends, the whisper had turned into a roar. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what. The receipt weighed heavily in my hand, though it was nothing more than a flimsy piece of paper. It felt like a brick, a physical manifestation of all the doubts swirling in my head. The date and time were unmistakable. A Friday night, the same Friday she'd told me she was at book club discussing The Nightingale. It didn't add up. Josie wasn't the kind of woman to splurge on a $200 dinner for herself, let alone lie about where she was. But here it was, undeniable proof that something wasn't right. I tucked the receipt back into her purse, careful to leave it exactly as I found it. My mind was a storm of questions, accusations, and gut-wrenching suspicions. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd gone out with Sharon or one of her book club friends and just hadn't mentioned it. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I started paying closer attention. Josie had always been an open book, her habits and routines predictable as clockwork. But now, cracks were forming in the foundation of the life we'd built together. Her phone was the first thing I noticed. She never used to care much about it, leaving it lying around the house or in the car. Now, it was glued to her side. She took it with her everywhere, into the bathroom, to the garden, even to bed. She turned off the notifications, and her once casual habit of letting it buzz and ping had vanished. I tested her one night after dinner. "Mind if I borrow your phone? Mine's dead, and I need to check something real quick." The panic that flashed across her face was unmistakable. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the device like I'd asked for her soul. "Sure," she said, forcing a laugh. "But let me just check something first." She fiddled with the screen for a few agonizing seconds before handing it to me. By the time I had it, the browser was open to a harmless recipe website, as if she'd been looking up a new way to cook chicken. I pretended to scroll, my chest tightening with every second. She was hiding something, but what? That night, while she was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone sat charging on the nightstand. I reached for it, my hands trembling. It was locked, of course, but the password wasn't hard to guess. Our anniversary. The messages were my first stop, but there was nothing suspicious. No incriminating texts, no strange numbers. Just the usual chatter with Sharon, our younger daughter Emily, and a few friends from her book club. But then I saw the second messaging app, one I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I opened it. The messages were sparse, but damning. A string of texts from someone named M. The tone was unmistakably intimate. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. I stared at the words until they blurred. My mouth went dry, my hands clammy. M's profile picture was a scenic shot of a beach. No face, no name. Just a placeholder for the person who had upended my life in a single sentence. I scrolled further, piecing together fragments of their conversations. They had a routine, late-night texts, plans for clandestine meetings, compliments that felt like daggers. Josie was cheating on me. The weight of it crushed me, leaving me gasping for air. I put the phone back, careful to leave no trace of my invasion. As I heard the shower turn off, I slipped into bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Proof. And a plan. The next morning, I woke up with a singular focus. The shock of the discovery had worn off, replaced by a cold, calculated resolve. If Josie thought she could betray me and waltz through life unscathed, she had another thing coming. But I wasn't going to fly off the handle. No screaming matches. No decisions. That wasn't my style. I was an engineer by trade, methodical, precise. If she was going to play games, I'd play smarter. First, I needed tools. I spent the day researching everything from GPS trackers to hidden cameras, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I dug deeper into the shadowy corners of surveillance tech. By the afternoon, I'd ordered everything I needed: a discreet camera disguised as a clock, a keychain voice recorder, and a tracking device small enough to slip into her car without her noticing. While I waited for the gadgets to arrive, I worked on step 2, gathering intel. Josie had mentioned a girl's night out the following Friday, something she hadn't done in years. I played along, smiling and nodding, pretending not to notice the way her eyes darted nervously when she told me. "Have fun," I said, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "You deserve it." The next few days were a blur of careful observation. Every glance she stole at her phone, every vague excuse, every unnecessary trip to the store was logged in the growing file of evidence in my mind. By Friday, the equipment had arrived. I spent the afternoon installing the camera in our bedroom, ensuring it had a clear view of the bed. The voice recorder went into her favorite purse, the one she took everywhere. And the tracker? It nestled neatly under the driver's seat of her car, secure and undetectable. As she got ready for her girls' night, I stayed calm, even helping her zip up the dress she swore she hadn't bought for anyone special. "You look stunning," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks, babe," she replied, her voice a little too cheerful. When she finally left, I waited exactly 5 minutes before pulling up the tracking app on my phone. Sure enough, she wasn't headed to any restaurant or wine bar. She was driving straight toward the edge of town, where a fancy hotel stood like a beacon of bad decisions. I followed the dot on the screen as it stopped in the hotel parking lot. Then I opened the live feed from the bedroom camera, my stomach churning as I prepared for what might come next. Hours passed, and I watched the empty bed on my phone, my nerves unraveling with each tick of the clock. It was almost midnight when she finally came home, slipping into bed without a word. The next morning, I waited until she left for yoga, a new hobby she'd taken up, though I had my doubts about where she was actually going. I retrieved the devices. The tracker confirmed she'd been at the hotel for 3 hours. The recorder captured snippets of conversation. Low, intimate murmurs from someone who wasn't me. But it was the footage that shattered me. The camera had caught her returning home, phone pressed to her ear, a dreamy smile on her face. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over her lips as if reliving a kiss. The evidence was irrefutable. She didn't love me anymore. And that's when my plan took shape. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to beg, plead, or scream. I was going to make her pay, but not in the way anyone would expect. After watching the footage, I sat there, staring at the screen, letting the full weight of betrayal wash over me. Every kiss we'd shared, every memory we'd built, every promise she'd made, tainted by her actions. But I wasn't going to let anger consume me. Not yet. That would come later in its proper place. If Josie thought she could live this double life without consequences, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I spent the weekend working on my plan, the edges sharpening with every passing hour. Revenge wasn't just about hurting her. It was about making her see, making her feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused me. And I wasn't going to take the obvious route. No shouting matches. No divorce papers flung onto the kitchen table. I wanted precision. By Monday morning, I had everything I needed: a carefully crafted alibi, a few phone calls to the right people, and one final, unexpected piece of leverage. The first part of my plan involved patience. I acted normal, or as close to normal as I could manage. Josie, oblivious to my growing web, seemed almost giddy these days. She hummed while cooking dinner, smiled more often, and even surprised me with a back rub one evening. Her guilt was manifesting as overcompensation, but I let her have it. Every sweet gesture she made only fueled my resolve. I kept a close eye on her schedule. She was predictable in her routines, and by Thursday, she dropped another nugget of information without realizing it. "I'm meeting Sharon for lunch on Saturday," she said casually, brushing past me in the kitchen. "She wants to go over her grad school applications." Sharon had mentioned no such thing in our last conversation, but I didn't let on. "That's great," I replied. "You two deserve some quality time together." She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and carried on as if nothing was amiss. On Saturday morning, I left the house early, telling Josie I had errands to run. In truth, I'd rented a room at the same hotel her tracker had led me to the week before. I needed to be close enough to act without tipping her off. I parked in a corner of the lot where my truck wouldn't be spotted and waited. The tracker in her car pinged at exactly noon, just as I'd expected. She wasn't heading to the cafe Sharon liked. She was heading back to the hotel. My chest tightened as I watched the dot move closer. Part of me wanted to storm in there, catch her in the act, and let the fury take over. But I'd already set the wheels in motion, and there was no turning back now. Once she was inside, I pulled out my phone and made a quick call. "It's time," I said simply. On the other end, a man I'd hired days ago, a private investigator with a knack for discretion, confirmed he was ready. He'd been tailing Josie for the past few days, gathering every detail about her movements, her companion, and their meetings. I stepped out of the truck and entered the hotel, keeping a low profile. The investigator had already informed the staff, who were more than willing to cooperate for the right price. I slipped through a side entrance, bypassed the lobby, and took the service elevator to the floor she was on. Josie didn't know it yet, but her carefully hidden world was about to come crashing down. When I reached her room, I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. From inside, I could hear faint laughter and the low murmur of voices. This was it, the culmination of my plan. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and began recording. Then, with a quiet but deliberate movement, I slid the key card, the one I'd bribed the front desk for, into the lock. As the door clicked open, I stepped inside, and everything went silent. The door swung open with a soft creak, and time seemed to freeze. Josie was there, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed. She was laughing, her hand brushing the shoulder of a man I'd never seen before. He was younger than me, tall and lean, with the kind of easy confidence that made my stomach churn. Her laughter stopped the moment she saw me. The color drained from her face, and her hand fell away from his arm like it had burned her. "Floyd," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The room felt suffocatingly small, the air thick with the scent of perfume and deceit. The man, her lover, I assumed, stood up abruptly, his face a mix of confusion and alarm. He looked at Josie, then at me, then back at her. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice shaky. I didn't answer him. My eyes were locked on Josie, who looked like she wanted to crawl under the bed and disappear. "You didn't expect me, did you?" I said, my voice calm but icy. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might faint. The man, emboldened by her silence, stepped forward. "Listen, buddy, I don't know what you think is going on here." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to talk." "Not yet." He froze, his bravado crumbling under the weight of my stare. I turned back to Josie. "You want to explain this? Or should I?" She finally found her voice, though it was trembling. "Floyd is not what it looks like. I swear." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that made her flinch. "Not what it looks like? Really? That's the best you've got?" Her eyes darted to the man, then back to me. I was going to tell you. You just what?" I snapped, my calm facade cracking. "You were going to tell me when? After your little rendezvous? Or maybe after you decided whether he was worth blowing up our life for?" She started to cry then, tears streaming down her face as she stammered through half-formed apologies and excuses. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "It's just, I've been feeling so lost, so invisible. And he made me feel special again." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Special," I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "Was that before or after you lied to my face and told me you were at book club?" Her lover finally spoke again, his tone less confident this time. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married. If I had—" "Don't," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't pretend otherwise." He held up his hands in surrender, taking a step back. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay in control. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, looking at both of them. "You're going to sit down and listen. And then you're going to regret every decision that led you to this moment." Josie's tears stopped, replaced by a flicker of fear. She knew me well enough to recognize that tone, the calm before the storm. I pulled out my phone and held it up, showing them the screen. "I've been recording this whole thing," I said. "And I got plenty more where this came from. Photos, videos, text messages. Everything." Her lover paled, his bravado completely gone. Josie looked like she might throw up. "What do you want?" she whispered. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out soon enough." The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Josie sat frozen on the edge of the bed, her eyes darting between me and the man she'd chosen to betray me with. He looked even worse, his face pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "What do you want?" Josie repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned against the wall, keeping my gaze steady, my voice unnervingly calm. "That depends on you, Josie. You've already made your choices. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Her lover, as I now knew him, took a hesitant step forward. "Look, man, I didn't mean to get in the middle of anything. If you're mad at someone, it should be her." "Sit down," I snapped, my eyes narrowing. "You're already in this. No point trying to slither out now." He sank into the chair near the window, his bravado completely deflated. I turned my attention back to Josie, who looked like she was bracing for a blow. "Here's the deal," I said, crossing my arms. "You're going to end this. Right here. Right now. No more lies. No more excuses. You're going to tell him exactly what you've been hiding from me. Every single sordid detail." She blinked, tears welling up again. "Floyd, please. Do it." I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Her hands trembled as she looked at him, her lips quivering. I lied to you," she stammered. "I told you my marriage was over, that I'd left him. But it wasn't true." M's face twisted in anger. "You told me you were separated, that you were just waiting on the paperwork." "I'm sorry," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how else to." "You didn't know how to get what you wanted without lying," I interrupted coldly. "That's what you mean." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I let the moment hang in the air before speaking again. "Now, here's the fun part," I said, addressing both of them. "You're going to help me clean up the mess you made. And if you don't, well..." I held up my phone, letting them see the recording. "This goes public. Your employer gets a copy. Your family gets a copy. Hell, I'll even send it to your church if you want." Josie's head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "Floyd, you can't." "Try me," I said, my voice like steel. and looked like he was ready to throw up. "What do you want us to do?" he asked, his voice small. "Simple," I said. "You're going to end whatever this is between you. And Josie, you're going to come clean to the girls. Tell them what you did and why their family is falling apart." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I took a step closer, towering over her. "You don't get to play the victim here, Josie. You made this bed. Now you're going to lie in it." The rest of the conversation was a blur of tears, apologies, and weak attempts at justifying the unjustifiable. I didn't let up, holding my ground as they squirmed under the weight of their guilt. By the time I left the hotel, I had what I needed: her promise to come clean, his agreement to disappear from her life, and the satisfaction of knowing they'd never forget the moment their little fantasy came crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Because the real revenge? That was still coming. I left the hotel with a sense of grim satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Josie had been given her chance to come clean, to face the wreckage she'd created. But in my gut, I knew she wouldn't. She'd cling to her lies like a lifeline, hoping I'd either forgive her or quietly let the whole thing slide. She didn't understand yet. There was no forgiveness coming. No quiet fade into obscurity. This wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about taking back the control she thought she could steal. I drove home, my thoughts razor sharp. If Josie wanted to pretend everything was fine, I'd let her. I'd smile, play the part of the doting husband, and give her all the rope she needed to hang herself. But behind the scenes, I was setting the stage for the kind of reckoning she'd never see coming. The first step was securing my assets. On Monday morning, I called my lawyer. Larry was a no-nonsense guy who'd helped me navigate some tricky situations before, though nothing quite like this. "Floyd, what's going on?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. "I need to make some changes," I said. "Big ones. I'm talking about the house, the accounts, the business, everything." He didn't ask questions, just got to work. Within a week, my name was the only one on the deed to the house. Our joint accounts were drained. The funds moved into a private account Josie couldn't touch. Even her car, a gift I'd bought her years ago, was now legally mine. She didn't notice, of course. She was too busy trying to keep up appearances, pretending our life was still as perfect as the fake smiles she plastered on every morning. The next step was subtle sabotage. I started planting seeds of doubt in her world. Tiny cracks she couldn't trace back to me. An anonymous email to her employer hinted at improprieties. Nothing too direct, just enough to raise eyebrows. A carefully worded message to the PDA suggested she might not be as devoted to the community as she claimed. At home, I played the perfect partner. I cooked dinner, planned family outings, and even surprised her with flowers one evening. She was so desperate to believe I'd forgiven her that she didn't question the sudden shift in my behavior. But behind the scenes, I was building a dossier. Every text message, every GPS ping, every snippet of audio from the voice recorder I'd planted. It all went into a neatly organized folder. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was curating it, crafting a narrative so airtight that when the time came, there would be no room for denial. Then I waited. Patience is a virtue, and I had plenty of it. Josie, on the other hand, was unraveling. The pressure of keeping up her facade, combined with the subtle chaos I'd sown, was taking its toll. By the end of the month, she was a shell of the woman she'd been when this started, nervous, jumpy, and increasingly desperate to keep me happy. "Floyd," she said one night over dinner, her voice trembling, "I know things have been tense lately, but I want to make this work. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix things." I looked her straight in the eye, masking the satisfaction bubbling under the surface. "Me too," I said. She smiled, relief washing over her face. If only she knew. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place the following week when my investigator delivered his final report. It was a masterpiece. Photos, videos, timelines, even a detailed breakdown of her lover's personal life. I stared at the folder in my hands, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was it, the endgame. But it wasn't just about ending things with Josie. It was about ensuring she felt the full weight of her choices. And when the time came, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. The morning began like any other. Josie was at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface of our quiet suburban life. She wore the same strained smile she'd been clinging to for weeks, desperate to convince me, and herself, that everything was fine. It was time. I took my place across from her, setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care. For a moment, I just watched her, letting the tension simmer. She must have felt it because her smile faltered. "Floyd?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder, thick with the evidence I'd spent weeks compiling. I placed it on the table between us. "Open it," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she reached for the folder. The moment she flipped it open, her face went pale. Photos of her and M at the hotel. Screenshots of their messages. GPS logs tracking her every movement. The timeline of her betrayal laid out in excruciating detail. "I thought we should put everything on the table," I said, leaning back in my chair. "No more lies. No more pretending." She stared at the contents of the folder, her hands trembling. "Floyd, don't." I cut her off. "I've heard enough excuses. This isn't a conversation. It's a declaration." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just cold, calculated resolve. "Do you think I didn't notice how you've been acting? Do you think I didn't see the signs? You thought you could lie to me, disrespect me, and walk away without consequences." "Floyd, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I love you. I made a mistake, but A mistake?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Mistakes happen once. This wasn't a mistake, Josie. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose this. You chose him." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. It should have hurt to see her like that, but it didn't. Not anymore. "I wanted to believe you," I continued, my voice steady. "I wanted to trust you. But you've burned that bridge, and now you're going to face the consequences." Her phone buzzed on the table, cutting through the silence like a knife. She flinched, her eyes darting to the screen. It was a message from M. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Miss you already." I picked up the phone and slid it across the table to her. "Go ahead," I said. "Reply. Tell him what I'm about to tell you." She looked at me, panic in her eyes. "Floyd, please don't do this." "Oh, I'm not just doing this," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "I've already done it." Her confusion was almost pitiable. "Almost. I've filed for divorce," I said, watching the words hit her like a physical blow. "The papers are being served today. And just so you know, I've also contacted every person in that folder, his wife, his employer, even his parents. By the time I'm done, your little affair will be public knowledge." She stared at me, her tears replaced by a look of sheer terror. "You can't." "I can," I said, cutting her off. "And I already have." She sat there in stunned silence as I stood and grabbed my keys. "You're going to find out what it feels like to lose everything, Josie," I said, my hand on the door. "The way you made me feel when you threw away 30 years of marriage for a cheap thrill." I turned to leave, but paused, looking back at her one last time. "Oh, and one more thing. When you explain this to the kids, make sure you tell them the truth." "Because I will." Her sobs followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. As I drove away, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I'd been handed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Josie had made her choices. Now she'd live with them. The silence in the house was deafening when I came home that evening. Josie's car was in the driveway, but the lights inside were dim, the faint glow of the living room lamp barely visible through the window. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me, and was greeted by an eerie stillness. She was sitting on the couch, clutching the folder I'd left her with. Her face was blotchy and tear-streaked, her eyes hollow as she looked up at me. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it beneath the weight of her betrayal. "You told them," she said, her voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against it, crossing my arms. Every single one I confirmed. Your lover's wife. His boss. Even your book club friends. I thought they deserved to know the truth about the person you've become. She flinched, her grip tightening on the folder. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling. You could have handled this privately, between us. Like you handled your affair? I shot back, my voice sharp. Privately? Behind my back? Josie, don't talk to me about handling things. You don't get that luxury anymore. She broke into fresh sobs, and for a moment, I let her cry. It was strange, watching the woman I'd loved for 30 years fall apart before me. Once, I would have done anything to ease her pain. Now, I could barely muster an ounce of sympathy. The fallout of my actions was swift and far-reaching. The calls started pouring in the next morning, friends, neighbors, even our daughters. Sharon was the first to confront Josie, storming into the house with tears of her own. How could you do this, Mom? She demanded, her voice thick with emotion. To Dad? To us? How could you risk everything for him? Josie tried to explain, but Sharon wasn't having it. I don't want excuses, she snapped. I want the truth. Did you even think about what this would do to us? I stayed out of it, letting Josie face the consequences of her choices. Emily, our younger daughter, called later that day, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I can't even look at her, she said. Dad, I don't know what to do. Just focus on yourself. I told her. You don't have to take sides, Em. But don't let her manipulate you either. As for Em, his life was unraveling just as quickly. His wife, furious and humiliated, filed for divorce the moment she received the evidence. His employer suspended him, pending an investigation into his conduct, and his social circle quickly turned against him. The chaos I'd unleashed was brutal, but it was necessary. Josie and her lover hadn't just betrayed me. They betrayed the life we'd built, the family we'd created. And now, they were paying the price. By the end of the week, the house was a shadow of what it once was. Josie moved into the guest room, her presence reduced to a ghost haunting the edges of my life. The once lively dinners, the laughter, the shared glances, all of it was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. She tried, of course, little gestures meant to win back my favor. A cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, an apology scrawled on a sticky note left on the fridge. But it was too late. The bridge had been burned, and I wasn't about to rebuild it. I love you, Floyd, she said one night, standing in the doorway of the guest room. Her voice was small, almost childlike. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. I didn't respond. I just looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The divorce proceedings began the following week. I'd made sure the terms were airtight, leaving Josie with just enough to get by, but no more. The house, the savings, even her car, all of it was mine now. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being fair. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. As I sat in the lawyer's office, signing the final documents, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. This wasn't the ending I'd envisioned for my life, but maybe it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to find myself again. Josie had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the porch of what was now my house, staring out at the quiet neighborhood that had witnessed the rise and fall of my life with Josie. The air was crisp, the kind of sharp autumn morning that felt alive with possibility. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. It was done. Josie had left early that morning, her few remaining belongings packed into a small U-Haul. There had been no tearful goodbyes, no last-minute pleas for reconciliation. Just silence as she drove away, her silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror. And I let her go without looking back. The house was mine now, but it felt empty in a way that went beyond physical space. Sharon and Emily had been supportive throughout the ordeal, but they were grown and living their own lives. The silence echoed around me, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few months. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the folder that had been my weapon, my shield, and my undoing. It was a collection of pain, meticulously documented and cataloged. I should have burned it, but instead, I shoved it into the bottom drawer of my desk, locking it away. Some scars are meant to stay hidden. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild. It was strange relearning how to live without her. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, and turned the guest room, her last refuge in the house, into an office. I even took up cooking, filling the void with new recipes and the satisfaction of creating something from scratch. But the most important change wasn't in the house. It was in me. I joined a hiking group on a whim, something I'd always meant to do, but never got around to. The first few outings were awkward. I felt out of place, surrounded by strangers. But as the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to those Saturday mornings in the mountains. There was something healing about the solitude of nature, the rhythmic crunch of boots on dirt, the feel of the wind against my skin. It gave me space to think, to breathe, to let go. One Saturday, as the group was setting out on a trail, I found myself walking alongside a woman named Lauren. She was quiet at first, content to let the others chatter, but there was a calm energy about her that drew me in. "First time on this trail?" she asked, her voice warm and easy. "Yeah," I said, glancing at her. "It's beautiful, though." She smiled, nodding. "It's one of my favorites. There's a spot up ahead where you can see for miles. Totally worth the climb." We walked together for the rest of the hike, talking about everything and nothing. She was a teacher, recently divorced, with a dry wit that made me laugh in a way I hadn't in months. At the summit, as we stood looking out over the vast expanse of forest and sky, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Lauren and I started seeing each other outside of the group. Coffee, dinner, walks around the lake. It was slow and easy, without the weight of expectation or the shadow of the past. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Not the one I'd lost, but something new, something better. Looking back, I realized that Josie's betrayal, as painful as it had been, had forced me to confront truths I'd ignored for years. I'd been coasting through life, content but unfulfilled, letting the days blur into one another. Her actions had broken me, but they'd also set me free. On a sunny afternoon, months after the divorce, I stood at the trailhead with Lauren, watching as the group gathered for another hike. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "You ready?" she asked, her smile as warm as the sun. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." As we started up the trail, the weight of the past fell away, replaced by the steady rhythm of a new beginning. So, what do you think about my story? Drop a comment with your thoughts on my decision and how you would have handled it.